Licora City woke slowly, like a tired giant stretching under the rising sun. In the quiet room of a small apartment in Rosewood District, Grace Amarachi Williams stood at the window, wringing water from the last plate she washed. Her life had always been simple, cleaning offices, washing clothes for neighbors, taking whatever jobs came her way. Yet she carried something rare in a world full of hurry, a heart that refused to harden. Her mother's soft humming floated from the parlor, shaping the morning air into something warm. Grace breathed in deeply. She had grown used to humble beginnings, but not to giving up. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Hello?" she answered, steady but unsure. "Good morning. Am I speaking with Miss Grace Williams?" Her breath paused. "Yes, sir." "This is from Cole Manor on Licora Island. You applied for a live-in nanny position 2 weeks ago." Grace held the phone tighter. "You've been shortlisted. You will be caring for Mr. Adrian Cole-Nwoko's twin daughters. Accommodation and full salary included. Can you report by 8 a.m. tomorrow?" For a moment, the world blurred. She leaned against the wall, eyes stinging with disbelief. Yes, sir, I'm available." After the call ended, she stepped into the parlor, heart pounding. "Mama," she whispered, I got the job." Her mother, Mama Uju, lifted her eyes with the calm wisdom of a woman who had endured much and still believed more. A slow smile formed. "God has done it," Mama said. "But remember, my child love melts stone faster than fire. Those children need more than work. They need heart." Her younger brother peeked from behind the doorframe, silent but proud. Grace packed that night. 3 simple dresses, her best blouse, a small bottle of hope, and the worn New Testament Mama placed in her hand for courage. She didn't know that Licora Island was waiting with its cold mansion, its heavy walls, and 2 little girls whose laughter had died with their mother. She didn't know she was walking into a house frozen in grief. But she knew one thing: she would try. As she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Grace whispered into the darkness, "Lord, carry me where I cannot carry myself." And far away, in the glass-walled silence of Cole Manor, a grieving billionaire stood at his window, unaware that the girl who would change everything had already taken her first step toward him. The next morning, the taxi slowed before the towering black gates of Cole Manor on Licora Island. Grace stepped out, clutching her small bag as the sun glinted off marble pillars and glass walls that reached up for the sky. Everything around her whispered wealth, silence, and a loneliness she could feel even from outside. The uniformed guard eyed her from head to toe, suspicion sharp in his voice. "Yes, who are you looking for?" "I'm Grace Williams," she said, forcing confidence into her tone. "Reporting for the nanny position." A pause. The intercom buzzed. The gates opened slowly, like a mouth deciding whether to swallow her whole. Inside, the compound was breathtaking. Fountains, trimmed hedges, a driveway so polished it reflected the sky. But beneath the beauty, Grace sensed something heavy, like a house holding its breath. On the grand steps stood a tall woman with a stern face and a gray uniform pressed so sharply it could cut glass. "I am Madam Tina Adibe, house manager," she said without warmth. "Follow me." Her eyes swept over Grace Bunn's shoes with quiet judgment. "Nannies don't last here," she added. "The last 3 did not last even a month." Grace swallowed. "I will try my best, Ma." Inside, the mansion felt like a museum of frozen memories. The first wall was lined with pictures of a beautiful woman. Naomi Cole-Nwoko, smiling with her twin daughters in her arms, wedding portraits, a beach, a christening. Then abruptly, the picture stopped. Bare walls, silence, as if joy had been cut off mid-sentence. In the far corner of the living room stood a man with broad shoulders, sharp presence, and eyes darker than storm clouds. He didn't turn at first, only stared out the massive window like someone trying to see the world but unable to feel it. When he finally faced her, his expression was unreadable. "You're Grace Williams," Adrian Cole-Nwoko said, not a question, a verdict. "Yes, sir," she replied. "My daughters are difficult," he said. His voice held discipline, grief, and exhaustion. "We have had challenges with nannies. I expect competence, not chaos." "I understand, sir." He studied her, testing the steadiness in her eyes. "Their names are Isabella and Gabriella. Bella and Gabby, they are 2 years old. They were very close to their mother." His jaw tightened at the last sentence. "She's gone." Grace lowered her gaze. "I am sorry, sir." He turned away sharply, as though the softness of sympathy hurt more than silence. Upstairs suddenly, 2 high-pitched wails burst through the air, loud, sharp, desperate. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. "They're awake." A beat. "Let's see if you meant what you said." Grace followed Madame Tina up the stairs, her heart pounding, her mother's words echoing. "Love melts stone faster than fire." And with each step she wondered, was she walking toward a job or toward a destiny far greater than she understood? The cries grew louder as Grace approached the nursery door. Cries so sharp, they felt like they could split the walls. Madame Tina stood beside her with folded arms, as though waiting to witness another failure. "Good luck," Tina muttered, not encouragement, a prediction. Grace inhaled, whispered a silent prayer, then opened the door. Inside were 2 polished wooden cribs, twin islands floating in a sea of toys arranged too perfectly to belong to real children. Bella stood gripping her crib rails, eyes fierce, mouth wide with a scream that seemed to shake her whole body. Gabby, smaller and softer, clutched her blue cloth with trembling fingers, crying in broken, hiccuped waves. Their tiny faces were red with frustration. Their grief hung in the air like smoke. Grace stepped forward slowly. "Hello, Bella. Hello, Gabby." Bella seized the nearest toy block and hurled it toward the floor, the plastic crack echoing like defiance. Gabby's sobs rose again, a fragile, frightened sound. Grace didn't flinch. She knelt between the cribs, letting the weight of their emotion fill the room without letting it break her. "It's okay," she whispered, voice low and warm. "I'm the patient kind." She tried the bottles, rejected. Tried lifting them, screams grew louder. Checked diapers. Tiny kicking feet made it nearly impossible. Minutes stretched into an hour, and sweat gathered at Grace's hairline. Her arms ached, her back burned, and still the cries continued. It was like holding 2 storms that refused to calm. But Grace remembered what Mama Uju always said. Pain doesn't always need a solution. Sometimes it needs presence. She removed the crisp blouse she had worn to look professional and slipped into the soft black and white nanny uniform laid out for her. More comfortable, more humble, more her. Then she sat on the floor, cross-legged, and gently lifted both twins, one on each side of her chest. Their cries battered her ears, but she closed her eyes and began to hum, a lullaby with no words, a tune her mother used on nights when heat, hunger, or heartbreak made sleep impossible. Slowly, the storm began to soften. Bella's fierce cries faded into sharp whimpers. Gabby's sobs dissolved into trembling breaths. Their little bodies leaned into Grace's warmth, testing the promise she had given. "I'm not going anywhere." The nursery fell into a deep, aching silence. Grace exhaled a long, exhausted release. At the doorway, unseen, Adrian Cole-Nwoko stood watching. He had come expecting chaos, another nanny defeated, another reminder that no one could reach his daughters. Instead, he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time: his children resting in someone's arms. For a second, just a second, the wall he'd built around his heart cracked. Grace didn't notice him. She was already drifting into an exhausted sleep, sitting upright, twins curled against her chest like two small hearts seeking warmth. And in that moment, the mansion that had forgotten how to breathe took its first quiet breath. Morning sunlight spilled softly into the nursery, but it brought no peace. The twins were awake, restless, and determined to test every limit Grace had. "Breakfast time," she said gently, placing bowls of pap on their trays. Bella turned her face away with queenly defiance. Gabby accepted one spoonful, then demanded a lullaby between each bite. Half the food landed on the floor. Grace wiped her forehead, reminding herself, patience is not weakness. It is strength under discipline. She sang between spoonfuls, hummed between spills, and cleaned every splash without complaining. Her arms ached from lack of sleep, but her voice remained steady. Then came the battle over the blanket. Bella grabbed Gabby's pink blanket like a warrior claiming treasure. Gabby screamed, clutching her blue cloth tighter, terror written all over her tiny face. Grace moved quickly. She took the blanket, kissed it softly, and pressed it against Bella's cheek. "This one smells like a cuddle," she whispered. Bella paused, suspicious, then slowly tucked it under her chin. Gabby sniffled, holding her blue cloth closer, relieved to have her space restored. Silence followed, a rare, fragile silence. From the doorway, Madame Tina paused, stunned. She had seen this same scene break grown women into tears. Yet here was Grace, calm, present, reweaving peace into a room that had forgotten how to hold it. Later, Grace cleaned biscuit crumbs from the rug, while Bella leaned over her arm, combing Grace's hair with a plastic fork. Gabby giggled as she poked Grace's cheek with sticky fingers. Grace smiled, whispering, "If we make a mess, we clean it together, okay?" Down the hallway, staff members lingered unusually long, pretending to dust or check curtains. Word had already begun to spread. The new nanny had lasted through the night, through the storm, through the morning chaos. By noon, the house whispered with something unfamiliar: hope. Grace stepped into the quiet hall, answering a call from Mama Uju. "How are you holding up, my child?" her mother asked. Grace stared at the nursery door, exhausted but steady. "It's hard, but I'm still here." Her mother's gentle laugh carried across the phone. "You've always had patience in your bones. Don't forget, love melts stone faster than fire." As Grace slipped back into the nursery, the twins sleeping peacefully at last, she whispered to herself, "Small progress is still progress." Upstairs, unseen once again, Adrian stood by the railing, listening not for crying, but for the silence Grace had created. A silence not of fear, but of peace. For the first time since Naomi's passing, the mansion did not feel like a tomb. It felt, just slightly, like a home trying to wake up. By the second afternoon, the nursery air felt thick, too polished, too controlled, too heavy for children who needed room to breathe. Bella kicked her crib like a tiny drummer fighting an invisible enemy. Gabby whimpered in rising waves, clutching her blue cloth as if the world was collapsing again. Grace wiped sweat from her forehead. Something in her spirit whispered, "Children are not flowers for display. They need space, air, freedom." She scanned the room, then made a decision no nanny before her had dared to try. With gentle determination, she gathered a large plastic basin from the storage closet and carried it outside to the sunny patio. She filled it halfway with cool water from the garden hose. A cleaner passing by stared at her like she was mad. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Letting them breathe," Grace replied. She returned to the nursery, scooped up the twins, one on each hip, and carried them outside. Madam Tina appeared at the doorway, arms folded, face tight with skepticism. "Be careful," she warned sharply. Grace simply nodded. Bella and Gabby stared at the basin suspiciously, their little feet curling as the cool water touched their skin. Bella leaned back. Gabby froze, unsure. Grace dipped her own hand in the water and splashed gently. "See? Just water. Just play." Then she lifted the hose, set it to a soft spray, and let a gentle man-made rain fall over their tiny heads. What happened next was a miracle. Bella squealed, a bright, sharp sound full of surprise. Gabby gasped, then broke into giggles, soft and sweet, like bells in a quiet room. Little hands slapped the water. Little feet kicked and splashed. For the first time, the twins laughed. Not a forced laugh, not a polite giggle, real laughter. Deep laughter. Healing laughter. Grace laughed too, unable to hold it in. "Small, small, my queens," she joked, spraying the hose like a ribbon. Upstairs on a business call, Adrian Cole-Nwoko stopped mid-sentence. Something, the sound, the memory, the impossible, pulled him toward the window. And there he saw it. His daughters laughing, splashing, alive. He froze, phone slipping from his hand. The last time he heard that kind of laughter, Naomi had been alive. The patio scene shook him to his core. Water, sunlight, the twins' joy, and in the middle of it all, Grace, steady, patient, radiant. His lips parted in amazement, then curved into a small, unfamiliar smile, a real one. Grace looked up and met his eyes across the distance. No words, just a quiet nod, as if they both recognized the miracle unfolding. That evening, when the house settled into night, a message arrived on Grace's phone. Short, uncertain, from a man who rarely said thank you. "Thank you for today." Adrian, Grace smiled softly, replied, "We will keep trying. The girls deserve it." In the cold mansion that had forgotten how to breathe, laughter had returned, falling like rain, and nothing would ever be the same again. The week began with sunlight and ended with shadows. It started subtly. Bella pushed away her lunch with unusual force. Her stubbornness wasn't new, but the paleness in her cheeks was. Gabby leaned heavily against Grace's chest, her usual soft whimpers replaced by a frightening quiet. Grace touched Bella's forehead. "Warm, too warm." She checked Gabby. "Hot, burning." Her heart tightened. Mothers know fear. Nannies with true hearts feel it too. She grabbed the thermometer. 38.9 degrees Celsius for Bella. 39.2 degrees Celsius for Gabby. Her breath caught. Fever. And rising fast. "Madam Tina," Grace called, voice steady but urgent. The house manager rushed in. face creasing with concern. "What now?" Tina demanded. "They're burning," Grace said. "They need a hospital." "Mr. Adrian traveled to Abuja this morning," Tina replied. "He won't be back until tomorrow." Fear threatened to choke Grace, but she pushed it aside. "I'm not waiting," she said firmly. She packed diapers, wipes, bottles, thin blankets, bare essentials for survival. Cradling both girls on her hips, she turned to the driver. "Nearest hospital. Now." Something in her tone made him obey instantly. Inside the emergency ward, everything moved fast. Bright lights, nurses rushing, antiseptic sting. Gabby's little body went limp, her cries fading into soft, terrifying whimpers. Bella clung weakly to Grace's shirt. Grace's heart fought panic. "Not them! Not now!" She whispered prayers under her breath, soft, desperate, raw. The doctor hurried them in. High fever was starting fluids immediately. Wires, IV lines, cold cloths pressed to tiny foreheads. Grace held their hands, whispering, "Stay with me, my queens, I'm right here." Hours blurred into an endless night. Then suddenly a shadow fell across the room. Adrian. He wasn't supposed to be back yet. He must have taken the next flight. His eyes locked onto the IV drips, the wires, the pale cheeks of his daughters. And then on to Grace. You should have called again," he said, voice breaking under the weight of fear. Grace swallowed. "I did, sir. I'm sorry." He closed his eyes, anger collapsing into guilt. "No, I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "You did the right thing." He moved to Bella's side, taking her tiny hand like it was glass. Grace stood opposite him, holding Gabby's limp fingers. Between them lay two little girls fighting fevers, and two adults realizing they were no longer strangers. They were battling the same fear, for the same children. Near dawn, the fever broke. Bella slept deeply. Gabby's breathing softened. The doctor smiled. "They're stabilizing." Grace pressed her hands to her face, whispering thanks. Adrian exhaled as though a mountain had lifted off his chest. He looked across the hospital bed at Grace. His eyes, tired but clear, held a depth he had never shown before. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not leaving them." Grace shook her head softly. "They're my girls, too. At least in my heart." Something shifted in Adrian. Something neither of them spoke aloud. But it hung in the room between the quiet beeps and the softened breaths. Mine, too. The drive back from the hospital was wrapped in silence, the kind that follows a storm. Bella slept on Grace's lap, thumb tucked in her mouth. Gabby leaned against Adrian's chest, small fingers gripping his shirt, as if afraid he might disappear. Adrian held her gently, but his eyes carried the exhaustion of a man who had faced his greatest fear and barely survived it. At Cole Manor, Grace settled the twins in their cribs, placing cool cloths on their foreheads, smoothing their curls with hands still trembling from the night's terror. She whispered tiny prayers over them, one for each little heartbeat. Adrian stood in the doorway, jacket off, sleeves rolled, watching silently. Not the stern observer from her first day, not the cold billionaire locked behind grief, but a father raw, shaken, and grateful. When Grace turned to leave, his voice stopped her. Grace, just her name, but heavier than words usually carry. She turned slowly. "My wife's name was Naomi," he said, his tone soft for the first time since she'd met him. She loved mornings, used to sit out on the patio with tea, talking about nothing and everything. Grace paused. Adrian had never shared this with anyone, Not Tina, not staff, not even family. This was not information. This was grief opening its first window. She died just after the twins were born. He continued, voice tightening, and after that, everything in this house became noise, either too loud or too silent, nothing in between. Grace listened, not to respond, but to honor the weight of what he was carrying. "Mr. Adrian, you've done your best," she said gently. He shook his head, eyes clouding. "No, I built walls instead of bridges. I've been here but not present. My daughters were drowning and I didn't know how to reach them." Grace stepped closer, her voice soft but strong. "Sir, sometimes the heart shuts down to survive, but shutting down is not the same as not caring." Their eyes met, his filled with a pain long buried, hers with a compassion he didn't know how to receive. The moment stretched, quiet, healing, fragile. Before it could break, the twins stirred, whimpering softly. Grace moved instantly, placing gentle hands on their backs until their breath steadied. Adrian watched her, every motion, every instinct, every whisper of comfort. And something inside him shifted quietly. Not love, not yet, but trust and the beginning of belief. Later that night, as Grace settled into her small room near the nursery, she whispered, "Lord, thank you for today's mercy." And in his study, Adrian opened the drawer where Naomi's silver bracelet lay. He touched it gently, then closed his eyes. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. The house, once cold and breathless, was beginning, slowly, quietly, to heal. Morning returned slowly to Cole Manor, but for the first time it didn't come with fear. Bella and Gabby woke with soft murmurs instead of piercing cries. Their fevers had broken, their breaths were calmer, their tiny fingers reached, not in panic, but in need. Grace fed them gently, checking their temperatures every hour. She moved around the nursery like someone weaving light back into a place that had forgotten how to shine. Bella leaned her head on Grace's shoulder, something she had never done before. Gabby touched Grace's cheek softly, a silent gesture of trust. Down the hall, voices whispered, "She must be praying? Maybe it's luck." "No, it's something else." By midday, the twins were strong enough to sit by the window, watching sunlight dance across the polished floors. Grace sat with them, humming the lullaby with no words, the one that had carried them through their darkest night. From the doorway, Madame Tina watched, her cold exterior cracking for the first time. "You're doing well," she said quietly. Grace smiled. "We're trying." Tina hesitated, then added, "Most people think children misbehave for no reason. But sometimes they're just trying to say, 'Please don't leave me too.'" Grace nodded. She understood in ways deeper than words could hold. Later that afternoon, Adrian returned from a short business meeting, expecting chaos. Instead, he found his daughters, peaceful, giggling, alive with soft energy. Gabby toddled toward him, lifting her small arms. Adrian froze, stunned. She hadn't reached for anyone, not even him, since Naomi died. He bent slowly, lifting her into his arms. Bella waddled over too, touching his leg with a shy grin. He swallowed hard, blinking quickly. Grace looked away to give him privacy, but she didn't miss the trembling in his breath, the way his shoulders softened, the way his heart seemed to exhale for the first time. That evening, Adrian approached her in the hallway. I don't know how to thank you, he said. Grace lowered her gaze. The girls are strong. They just needed space to feel safe again. And you give them that, he replied. A pause. You give me that too, without even trying. Grace felt something warm tighten in her chest. Respect, connection, a recognition deeper than words. But she kept her voice calm. We're all healing, sir, one day at a time. He nodded, holding her gaze a moment longer than before. As she returned to her room, Grace reflected on the journey. From screams to laughter, from fear to comfort, from distance to something beginning to look like trust. In the quiet of his study, Adrian opened the drawer and touched Naomi's bracelet again. But this time he didn't close it with grief. He closed it with gratitude. For the first time since her death, the mansion didn't feel like a monument of sorrow. It felt like a house learning, slowly, gently, to breathe again. Days turned into a gentle rhythm, one the mansion had never known before. Grace woke early each morning, slipping quietly into the nursery, while the world outside still yawned. Bella greeted her with sleepy smiles. Gabby extended her little arms for their morning hug. The twins had begun to heal, and in ways even Grace didn't expect. They followed her everywhere. Tiny feet padding behind her in the hallway, tiny fingers tugging at the hem of her uniform, tiny voices babbling as if they were learning to speak again simply because they felt safe. The staff whispered about it constantly. I've never seen them this calm, Chef Bode said. Or this happy, Cleaner Onyeka added. Madame Tina, who had once watched Grace with suspicion, now watched with reluctant admiration. You were right, Tina admitted one afternoon. Love melts stone faster than fire. Grace smiled softly. Mama taught me that. But not everyone in the house was changing at the same pace. Adrian struggled. He watched Grace with the twins from afar, sometimes from the railing upstairs, sometimes through the glass of his study door, sometimes with hands in his pockets, unable to step forward, but unable to walk away. He saw the way the twins laughed in her arms. He saw the way they leaned into her heartbeat. He saw the peace she carried, effortlessly, naturally, like Naomi once had. And that scared him. Because with every new miracle Grace brought into his home, the fortress around his heart trembled a little more. One evening after the twins had fallen asleep in Grace's arms during story time, Adrian lingered at the doorway. Grace noticed him and stood slowly so she wouldn't wake them. I didn't mean to interrupt, he said quietly. You weren't interrupting, Grace whispered. He stepped into the room, his gaze softening as he looked down at the tiny sleeping faces. My daughters. His voice faltered. They look peaceful. They're learning you're here, Grace said gently. Adrian swallowed. I'm trying. Grace nodded. Trying is enough. Healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's just showing up again and again. He stared at her then, something shifting in his eyes, gratitude, respect, something deeper he didn't know how to name. The silence between them was warm, not awkward, not heavy, just honest. Later that night, Grace stepped out onto the patio to breathe in the cool Licora night air. She whispered a small prayer of thanks, her heart full. Inside the mansion, Adrian stood alone in the dim hallway, his hand resting on the nursery door. He felt movement, not in the house, but in himself. Grace was right. Healing wasn't loud. It was slow, quiet, steady, a gentle knocking on the walls he had built around his pain. And tonight, For the first time, he didn't turn away. The mansion that once echoed with grief now glowed faintly, almost as if light had begun to seep through its foundations. It happened on a night when the air felt too still, too heavy, like the mansion was holding its breath again. Grace had just finished settling the twins after their evening bath. Bella had giggled as Grace tied her tiny bonnet. Gabby had fallen asleep, clinging to Grace's thumb. Everything felt calm, until Bella suddenly stirred. Her face scrunched. Her small body tensed. A whimper escaped her lip. Then she cried out, a sharp, terrified sound. Grace lifted her instantly. But Bella wasn't responding to her touch, not in the usual way. Her tiny limbs shook, her breathing hitched in quick, panicked gasps. Gabby woke with a scream, her blue cloth falling from her fingers. Her little body trembled violently as she tried to stand but collapsed into Grace's lap. Fear flooded the room like cold water. Grace checked their temperatures, normal, checked their breaths, fast, unsteady. Their eyes darted, searching the room for something. Someone. Then she understood. Night terror, triggered by memory, triggered by grief. Shh. It's okay, my queen, she whispered, but her heart raced. She called out into the hallway, "Someone get Mr. Adrian, please!" Her voice cracked. Footsteps thundered from the corridor. Adrian appeared, breathless, face flushed with fear. "What happened?" he demanded. Grace could barely speak. "They're shaking, they're scared." Without hesitation, Adrian scooped Gabby into his arms, pressing her trembling body against his chest. Grace held Bella tightly, rocking her gently. "Daddy's here," Adrian whispered, voice breaking. But the twins sobbed harder, reaching not for him, but for both of them at once. Adrian's eyes met Grace's, and for the first time there was no distance, no wall, no grief barrier. Just two hearts fighting the same battle. Grace shifted closer until their arms brushed. Together they held the twins, Grace humming the wordless lullaby, Adrian whispering soft reassurances between breaths that trembled with emotion. Minutes felt like hours. The house held its breath. The air grew thick with shared pain. Then slowly, like a storm deciding to fade, the twins' sobs softened. Their bodies relaxed. Their trembling eased. Gabby rested her forehead on Adrian's shoulder. Bella curled into Grace's neck, breathing deeply. Peace returned, fragile but real. Adrian closed his eyes, overwhelmed. I thought I was losing them too," he whispered. Grace placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You're not losing them, they're remembering. Grief isn't a wound, it's a story trying to heal." Her words hit him harder than she realized. In that moment, in the quiet nursery lit by the faint glow of the night lamp, Adrian felt something break open inside him. Not pain, not fear, but release. He had been strong for so long that he had forgotten. Strength sometimes meant being vulnerable. Grace saw it, felt it, and held the space gently. The twins slept again, wrapped in the arms of the only two people who refused to leave them. And as Grace laid Bella carefully in her crib, she felt Adrian's gaze on her, not with the grief that once weighed him down, but with something lighter. Something beginning, something dangerous, something beautiful. The night that broke the mansion's walls also rebuilt something new. A fragile bond between two hearts, learning to trust again. The morning after the night terror felt different. The air in Cole Manor was softer, lighter, as if some invisible burden had slipped quietly off its shoulders. Bella woke first, blinking sleepily at the morning sun. She reached for Grace without hesitation, her small fingers curling around Grace's uniform like it was an anchor. Gabby sat up next, rubbing her eyes before toddling straight into Adrian's waiting arms. There was no crying, no fear, just peace. Everyone in the house felt it. Chef Bode hummed loudly in the kitchen. Cleaner! Onyeka danced while sweeping. Even Madame Tina's voice held a softness that could almost be mistaken for joy. Grace watched the transformation with quiet gratitude. But it was Adrian who felt it the deepest. He had spent years walking through his own home like a visitor, a man surrounded by luxury but starved of life. Now, as he watched his daughters toddle between him and Grace, laughter bubbling from their tiny chests, he felt something he had forgotten. Hope. Later that afternoon, he found Grace sitting with the twins in the sunlit patio, the same place laughter had first been reborn. Bella was painting Grace's arm with water from a tiny brush. Gabby was curled against Grace's shoulder, humming softly. Adrian stood at the doorway, simply watching. "You've brought life back to this house," he said quietly. Grace looked up, startled by the sincerity in his tone. "I didn't do it alone, sir. They just needed time and love." He stepped closer, the sunlight catching the tired lines on his face line slowly softening after years of emotional winter. "I didn't realize how much I had shut down," Adrian admitted. "I thought grief was something you lock away. But you," his voice dipped, "you taught me that healing isn't weakness." Grace lowered her eyes, humbled. "I only did what any heart would do." "Not any heart," Adrian whispered. "Yours." The moment hovered between them, fragile, warm, full of possibilities neither dared to name. They were interrupted gently when Bella waddled forward with her little arms raised for Adrian. Gabby followed, grabbing Grace's hand. And just like that, the four of them stood together, a quiet, unspoken picture of a family being stitched together, thread by thread. That evening, after the twins fell asleep peacefully, Grace stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city lights. She whispered a prayer of gratitude for the home that had once been frozen but now glowed gently with warmth. Inside his study, Adrian opened Naomi's silver bracelet again. But this time he didn't touch it with grief. He touched it with gratitude for what had been and for what was quietly forming in its absence. As he closed the drawer, he whispered softly, "Naomi, they laughed again today, and I think I'm learning to breathe too." Cole Manor, once a monument of sorrow, now pulsed with life. It was no longer a house where grief lived unchallenged. It was a home healing, slowly, beautifully. And at the center of it all was Grace, the girl who entered with nothing but patience, faith, and heart, and ended up giving the mansion what it needed the most, a chance to begin again.